I've been given 10 minutes to make an overview of this book, so I'll speak a little fast. I know my colleague here, Ram, tells me on stage, speaking loudly does not mean speaking fast, but I will today. Distinguished panelists and friends and guests, thank you very much for being here this evening. There was a boy in a school in class 6 or 7 who was faring very badly in class, and his classmates used to taunt him and tease him, and the teachers did not regard him at all as bright. As part of the curriculum, they introduced computers. So suddenly this child started doing a good job, attending to classes, going to the computer class, spending time with the computers, and the teacher was shocked because the teacher was wondering that such a child who does not study, who is otherwise very lazy and extremely incompetent, how is it that the computer is attracting him? So he called this boy aside and he asked him, he said, Anand, what is it about computer that draws you to it? So he said, sir, the computer calls me Anand. My friends call me silly and foolish. That's the difference. For the computer, I'm significant, and that makes the difference because I want to feel important, and none of you make me feel important. So relationships are about that. It's about how do you make somebody feel important and significant. Mother Teresa said this, so beautifully. She said, you like me, you tell me. You don't like me, you tell me. But don't be indifferent to me because that hurts. And I think the fact of the matter is that relationships are fundamentally based on the significance that we give to one another. One of the people who talked about relationships way back at the turn of the 19th century was a man called, at the turn of the 20th century was a man called Jacob Marino, who started something called theater in action and psychodrama. He said, man is a relational being, basically. The quality of relationships we build and foster matters much. Without human interaction, each of us will slowly lose our meaning to live and finally perish like a flower which dies before it blooms. Relationships define us, give us cause to live, and help us become who we are meant to be. I want to share a story with you. I'm going to share a lot of personal stories, which is really what forms the core of my book. We used to live across the Music Academy on Cathedral Road in the late 60s when we relocated from Delhi and came to Madras. And across where we lived, there were a row of shops. And one of the shops had a barber shop, which was run by a guy called Parni. Very small shop, and my father apparently used to give this guy a lot of money time and again. The guy used to come across and give my father a head massage or whatever. Anyway, it so happened that my father passed on and we moved out of the area and we shifted elsewhere. A couple of years ago, I was running a training program in Mahabalipuram and I was driving to this resort which is close to Mahabalipuram, and I had a flat tire. It was dark, it was about 7 in the evening, and I had no clue how to change the tire, so I was standing on the road kind of wondering what to do, and a car from the opposite direction passed me and stopped. And an elderly gentleman got off the car and came to me and said, Yadav, can I help you? I said, yes, I have this problem. I have a tire which is flat and I don't know how to change it. So he said, don't worry, I'll have my driver change it. Where are you going? I said, I'm going to this resort, which is about 3 kilometers from here. He said, I'll drop you, I'll have my driver change it and I'll bring it, and he'll bring the car there, so don't worry. So I got to his car, and as we were going, he was inquiring about my background, who I was. I mentioned my father's name. You wouldn't believe, he stopped the car and he held my hand and started crying, and he said, I am Parni the barber. Your father gave me 10,000 rupees in 1968 to set up a shop, which I've done in Trichy, and today I have 3 shops. If your father hadn't done that for me, I wouldn't be where I am. So I realized that day that my father had paid it forward. Padma, a friend of mine who's here, gave me this book to read, and my father had actually paid it forward, which was paid back to me many years later through this Baba Parni. Whether it is in the context of an organization or one's personal life, investment in relationships is like investing in an emotional bank. As we invest money in a bank, we're able to draw from it because we made that investment. If you don't make that investment, you cannot draw. There's a saying in the army which my father used to say. He said, the army believes that if you invest in people in peacetime, you will bleed less in war. And I think it's never been said better. yet in spite of all this, in spite of knowing the fact that we must build relationships, we permit fracture, we allow some of them to sour, we diminish one another, we disregard, we resent, we judge, we blame. And again, it's a personal story. A cousin of mine and I started business together in the early 80s, and very successful. We ran a little manufacturing company making metal containers, and slowly as the business grew, it became who is more important, was he or I, and so it was a question of who will have the last word in the relationship. And finally the business closed and collapsed because it was a question of who had the last word. So ultimately you don't need a last word in a relationship. You don't need to prove a point always. You can always walk away from it, because the more important thing is to sustain that relationship. It reminds me of another story which Ram, my colleague, has often shared with me. Apparently there was an English production of the play Macbeth, in which the protagonist who plays Macbeth was taunting this young actor who was playing a lackey or something of that sort. So the scene is a very consequential scene when the lackey comes up to Macbeth and announces, saying that he tells him about the queen. So the lackey saw this as an opportunity to get even, to prove a point. So apparently on the day of a commercial production, he comes up to the protagonist on stage, Macbeth, because Macbeth is supposed to, after hearing what he says, supposed to launch into his soliloquy. So he comes up to Macbeth, and the words that he should utter are, "Sir, the queen is dead," or is no more, or whatever. But he comes up and says, "Sir, the queen is recovering." And in so saying, he throws Macbeth completely off, and he proves a point, because Macbeth doesn't know what to say after that. So again, as I was saying to you, we know that erosions should not happen, that our relationships should sustain, we should prevent it. It's not easy, I must say, to stem the tide once erosion and toxicity set in, yet it behooves each of us to prevent the spiraling down of relationships. In this book of mine, which I've called Creating Winning Relationships Through Conversations with Self, it's published by a local company called Notion Press, I attempt to walk alongside each of my fellow human beings, sharing with them through live examples of what relationships mean, as I have come to understand, what causes a tear in them, the challenges encountered, and what each of us can possibly do to rebuild those that have faltered, enhance those that are already rich, and find and celebrate those that can heighten our existence. I have another story I must share with you. Again, it's about my father. Again, as I was saying, we used to live across the academy, and there used to be this deformed man, a leper, who used to come begging at our doorstep. And this was early in the 60s, and in those days people were scared to allow lepers to come anywhere close to the house. Anyway, my father apparently, again, used to give him a lot of money. My mother and I never knew about this, and so we would kind of shoo him away, but he'd keep coming back every month. So this continued, and the leper kept coming back. He was a Malayali, but therefore spoke Tamil with an accent. Several years later, we'd gone to Guruvayur, the temple in Kerala, and we were standing there at about 4:35 in the morning before the temple opened, and there's this huge gathering. Getting in the temple was almost impossible. So my father, my mother and I and a couple of friends, we were waiting to get into the temple, and suddenly this accented Malayali voice called out to my father, said, "Sir." My father looked around. It was this leper who was there in Guruvayur, and he asked my father, he said, "Do you want to go into the temple?" So my father said, "Yes." He said, "Crowd is very large, I can't get in." So the leper said, "Don't worry, I'll arrange it." And you wouldn't believe, he started shouting in Malayalam, "I'm a leper, I'm a leper." And the minute he started shouting, everybody cleared, Suddenly it seemed that nobody wanted to be there. And he cleared the pathway for us to enter the temple. We went to the temple, and the man disappeared. So, what I realized was, when I recall that, irrespective of our limitations, we can all contribute in our own way to fostering relationships. The incident of this gentleman who helped us enter the temple tells me that relationships does not distinguish between those who are infirm or disabled and those who are well. In life and in organizations, sometimes we trample on people on our way up, even if we don't do it with awareness. Yet it is these same people that we meet as we spiral down. And this I've realized in my life. You walk up, you climb over people, and these are the same people you meet on your way down. Thus, it's important to remember that those who have helped us and supported us as we climb the ladder of success, for when we hurtle down, they will be there to cradle and support us. Each of us has someone we always remember for the positive manner they've impacted us. Sometimes it is a teacher, an old boss, a parent, a relative. Again, it's a very interesting thing. Relationships is not about giving in or about, just giving. It's also being able to receive with grace. It's also being able to accept with gratitude. And I want to quote a story again about, now that I have both my friends here, I want to talk about both of them. Madras Players were doing a play, and my aunt Grace is here also, from President of Madras Players, so she knows about the story. It was a play by Bhagwan Gidwani called Tiger Tiger. It was about Tipu Sultan. Ram was playing Mir Sadiq, one of the characters in it, and Yusuf Bhai, who's sitting here, was playing Hanif Beg. And there is a particular scene, I remember the play because I saw it. I was not then acting with the players, I was, but not then. So the scene is in which Mir Sadiq rants. He's ranting and raving and all sorts of things. And as Hanif Beg, Yusuf didn't have a single line to say. For 10 minutes, he just stood expressing every anguish that Mir Sadiq was feeling. And you wouldn't believe, at the end of it, when Mir Sadiq finishes what he's saying, the audience just stood up and raptures clapped. Yusuf gave without giving in, and he gave without expectation. That's what relationships are all about. You don't need to expect. I'm probably pontificating in some ways, making it simplistic, but I truly believe that, whether it's an organization or whether it's life, ultimately life is short. You're here today, gone tomorrow. So the only thing you can do for yourself, and this morning I wrote a column in the papers, which really says that you don't have control over what life does, but you do have a control over how you respond. Can we respond in a way that is enabling, supportive? Sheryl Sandberg, in her book Option B, says something so beautiful. She says, death ends life, but not a relationship. And I'm going to, before I close, I want to play you a song from an old Hindi film. This is that's from your watch. I want to play you a song from an old Hindi, 3 lines, but that really is what signifies relationships. So please bear with me. I'll just play this for you and then hand it over to my friend Ram Bhadran to take over. You all know this song, but this is special for me, and I'm going to play it for you. तो वही है जी, इसके अलावा और कुछ नहीं है. That's what life is all about. Ram, thank you.
Thank you, T.T. Srinath. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Group Captain Vijay Kumar, and to MMA, and to my good friend T.T. Srinath for giving me this opportunity to moderate a panel discussion on his book, Creating Winning Relationships Through Conversations with Self. Straight from the heart and wonderfully written through his personal experiences. It's a wonderful read for success in relationship building, as it reminds us of values and qualities that one should imbibe. There was no typing error in the title when I checked. I was reminded of a piece that I came across in the net some time ago. 1 million copies of a new book was sold in just 2 days due to a typing error of just one alphabet in the title. You want to know the name of the book? An Idea Can Change Your Wife. The great novelist Philip Pullman said that after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing that we need most in our life. Srinath has used this very effectively by weaving in his book many stories and parables. Hence I thought, what better way to start the proceedings than to narrate a parable myself? A father left 17 camels as an asset for his 3 sons. When the father passed away, his sons opened the will. The will of the father stated that the eldest son should get half of the 17 camels, while the middle son should give 1/3, and the youngest should be given 1/9 of the 17 camels. As it was not possible to divide 17 by half or 3 or 9, the 3 sons started to fight and a lot of bitterness followed. The 3 sons then decided to go to a wise man. The wise man listened patiently about the will. After giving a lot of thought, he brought one of his own camels and added the same to 17, thus making a total of 18 camels. Now he started reading the will. Half of 18 is 9. So he gave the eldest son 9 camels. 1/3 of 18 is 6, and the middle son got 6. 1/9 of 18 is 2, and the youngest son got 2. Now add this up. 9 plus 6 plus 2 is 17 from where he started off. The camel that he brought by himself, he took it back. What is the moral? The attitude of negotiation and problem solving is to find the 18th camel, i.e., the common ground. Once a person is able to find the common ground, the issue is resolved. Yes, it is difficult at times. However, to reach a solution, the first step is to believe that there is a solution. If we think there is no solution, we won't be able to reach any. I would like to take this a step further, that you not only have to believe that there is a solution, but also that it is worth finding. The solution has to be a win-win. Otherwise, it will be only temporary. This means that you have to invest and value the relationship enough to keep exploring until it works for both the parties. If you like this story, please share with your family and friends. If you didn't, you can still share with your family and friends. Who knows, you might just spark a thought. Welcome to the panelists who are here today to share their perspectives on relationships. Let me give a brief intro. Mr. Lakshman. Mr. Lakshman graduated as a mechanical engineer from the University of Madras and joined Rane Brake Linings as a management trainee in 70. Over the next 12 years, he held various positions and from 82 became involved in the management of other enterprises in the group. During this period, he took a sabbatical to attend a business management program for working professionals at the London Business School. Since 92, he has been chairman of the Rane Group of companies and is also on the board of several public limited companies. He has also served several industry organizations such as ACMA, Madras Chamber of Commerce, Industry, and ASSOCHAM, a federation of chambers of commerce, as president. Mr. P.C. Ramakrishna, Ram to some and PCR to others, brings to drama years of experience, having begun his journey as an actor with the Madras Players in 1967. Now totaling 50 years plus, he has lent substance, credibility, and dynamism to theatre in Chennai. He has won critical acclaim for his roles in Dance Like a Man, Mangalam, Anavais, The Lizard Waltz, The Good Doctor, amongst others. The latest, The Chudamani. I mentioned Chudamani because T.T. Srinath and myself were also part of the Chudamani group. He pioneered an experiment with solo theatre in English with Mercy, an adaptation of the Tamil novel by Shiva Shankari. A voiceover professional, he took early retirement from a corporate career to pursue his passion for theatre. He is also a Mridangam artist trained under the great Maestro, Palghat Mani Iyer. Between 1983 and 2003, he held the role of President Madras Players with aplomb and bound together a group of creative yet diverse individuals. In many ways, he is the link between the past of the Madras Players, a period of discovery, and the present, which is the age of experimentation, and the future, the age of realization. And finally, Mr. Raghavan Srinivasan, a senior business journalist and columnist who has been reporting, analyzing, and interpreting the India growth story since inception of economic reforms in India. Prior to the start of reforms, he was one of the pioneers of corporate journalism in India, bringing first-hand experience and insight to reporting on Indian businesses. Since he switched to journalism after nearly a decade-long stint in marketing in major corporates. An investigative journalist of repute, he has been responsible for breaking major stories like the Harshad Mehta stock scam, the return of Coke to India, the collapse of UTI, amongst many others. Currently the editor of Hindu Business Line, he has in the past led editions and held senior editorial positions in major newspapers around the country, including the Times of India, Indian Express, Hindustan Times, and Mail Today. Please join me in giving a big hand to the panelists. Welcome to the session, the panelists once again. Let's get the ball rolling. The biggest challenge leadership faces today is in dealing with relentless change in an environment marked with ambiguity and uncertainty. In this context, one would expect the leader to be trustworthy and communicate that. Engaging people is the key for sustained performance. In your vast experience, Mr. Lakshman, how is this played out in building and winning relationships?
The relentless change that you referred to in itself has been caused by leadership somewhere. Some leader resented the status quo that he saw and he drove change. And I would use as examples, classical examples such as Abraham Lincoln or Mahatma Gandhi, one that wanted to change the freedom for slavery, the other was that wanted to change the oppressive colonial rule. Now, basically, my point is that it is leadership that creates change, be it in social circumstances or business circumstances or even political circumstances. It is leaders who initiate and drive change. You talked about, I beg your pardon. You talked about communication and honesty. Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, these are absolute musts. The leader must create a vision, must create a goal, must communicate this effectively to his people and carry them with him. What was your third point?
On trust.
I mean, no question. If a leader cannot be trusted, forget it. He's not going to get anywhere.
Right. Actually, to sum up to what you said, trust, as you said, was the most important thing. Trust is the glue of life and is the most essential ingredient in effective communication. Stephen Covey quotes, "It is a foundational principle that holds all relationships." Now, moving to P.C. Ramakrishna. Apart from your corporate experience, you have extensively been involved in the field of arts, theatre, music, and dance. Trust and interpersonal dialogue are the key in creating win-win relationships. It was George Patton who once said, "Don't tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do and let them surprise you with their results." In the 50 years of theatre that you have been involved as actor, director, leader, what has been your experience in this regard, which has impacted relationships?
Thank you. In theatre, the operative word always is trust. Theatre is all about relationships between actors as actors, between actors as people who play roles on the stage. If there is a disconnect between people or disconnect between actors playing roles, the play will not come through. So you must basically operate from a standpoint of trust. You must trust your actor to do what he or she does best within the total ambit of the play. To give an example from theatre, George Patton is quite right. As a director, I would rather ask an actor That wasn't me. That you must ask an actor to give me what he or she has, rather than impose your will. Create the scenario, and I said, this is what I'm looking for. This is the kind of character I'm looking for. Tell me what you can give. Inhabit that character from your point of view. Let me see whether I like it in the total ambit of things. This is what I like to do as a director, and this is what works. So I must trust that person to do that. I mean, this is what builds relationships between actors. I'd like to say also with music, with which I am associated, you go to a kacheri, you don't go to listen to the singer or the violinist or the mridangam player separately. You go to see a relationship between these three people. You must see how they interact. Now, if one doesn't interact with the other, the kacheri doesn't come through. There are many singers who are so individualistic and who do not operate with their. For me, the kacheri doesn't work. I think music is about relationship. A third field that I operate in, which you're also involved, is a group choir which sings Indian choral music. There are 30 of us, and we sing different parts, from sopranos to bass. Unless we coordinate, cooperate, and trust each other and have a good relationship, there will not be music made outside. So I think this is the fountainhead of all activity in all the arts. Trust and your ability to get something new from somebody.
Great, thank you. So I would say that trust and faith are two sides of the same coin that make up relationships. If you have trust, faith follows. And if you have faith, then trust ensues. Would it be to summarize?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the example was already given by TT. The example of a play, and Yusuf Bhai, who's already sitting here. Trust involves security. It was a scene in which I had all the scene to myself. He had nothing. He was only a sounding board. I've written about that. In fact, at one point in the scene, he turned his back to the audience, it was a very broad one at that, and completely gave me his attention. And even when he knew that the audience was not looking at him, he gave me all the expressions that required me to complete that scene. He gave me unquestioningly his trust. Now, where did that come from? It came from a sense of security that when his moment came, nobody could stop him. It's insecurity that makes you not trust people. If you're secure in yourself, trust will be given and you have a product. Otherwise, you have only fragments.
Thank you. Strong and productive relationships are the heart of successful collaboration. Yet fostering those takes time. If you invest in choosing the right partners, nurturing trust, and establish good conflict management practices, you are better equipped to create win-win relationships. The book refers to a mural in a Johannesburg airport which says, if you want to travel quick, go alone. But if you want to travel far, go together. Given the industry that you come from, Mr. Srinivasan, what has been your experience which you can share with us?
You know, essentially, I think journalists will be unable to function if they did not have the ability to A, empathize, B, form very quick connections with people, and have the ability to have meaningful conversations. If you look at how we gather information, how do we gather information? I don't have a uniform which gives me the right to question people. I do not have a search warrant which gives me the right to enter anybody's premise and search and find out what I want. You know, I'm not talking about reportage, eyewitness, that's a very small portion of what we do, but almost all the other information that we do, we gather, from willing providers. And how do you, even when sometimes that information actually, proves somewhat damaging to the giver or the organization to which that giver belongs. So how do you achieve that? We achieve that by an ability, like I said, to actually just have conversations with people, because and engaged conversations. It's absolutely important not just to have a conversation, but to be mindfully engaged in a conversation, because that is when, you know, you are actually continuously exchanging information. Very good journalists also do this, by the way. They not only take information, not a one-way street all the time, but they also give information. Why do people talk to us? They talk to us because they also want information from us. They want insights. They want our take on issues maybe, or something. So it's always a two-way process. So I think, you know, it sort of sums up the basics of what a sustainable relationship can be. Now, one, there has to be give and take. It cannot be one way. You cannot only take and you cannot only give. It's not meaningful. The second is to be meaningfully and mindfully engaged with whoever it is that you're interacting with. And that's how you get information. I'll share one small anecdote about this Harshad Mehta's story. You know, how we broke it. Sucheta Dalal and I was working for the Times of India at that time. I had actually gone to Bombay to meet people at Hindustan Lever. Because my basic writing used to be on marketing, and HLL was doing some big brand restructuring at that time. And so I had an appointment later in the evening. So I was hanging around office having tea with my colleagues and chatting when somebody walked in and said, you know, I think there is something going on at State Bank of India, because they're not letting people into the main branch, and you know, there is this thing. So we made a few calls, and you know, somebody said there seems to be some payment problem. God knows, some audit is happening. So Sucheta said, okay, let me check with my contacts in the stock market. Why don't you go to State Bank and find out what's happening? So I went there, and you know, if I'd gone in as a judge, they had blocked access to the Treasury branch even for employees. The guards had been told not to let anyone in. So, and I stood there for a while wondering how to get in. Then I went in, started having a conversation with the guard. And he said, who are you? So I said, I gave him my real name, Srinivasan, very as South Indian as you can get. And he said, I have a problem. I am just landed in Bombay, and my uncle works in this office, and I need to meet him and take the key, otherwise I have no place to stay today. So this guy sort of, and this was after some chit chat, where are you from, what do you do, all that kind of thing. And he said, oh really, yeah, that should be a real problem for you. Why don't you go inside, you find your uncle and quietly take your key and go away. And that's how I got access to this thing. And I went and found out a whole lot of other things. So, but the point is that if I had just treated the guard as a guard and said, I am a reporter from the Times of India, let me in, he wouldn't have let me in. Maybe the story wouldn't have happened. So this is absolutely important. And I think, as I also went through this book, I think that was really something which resonated very strongly with me.
Thank you. You're talking about that Johannesburg mural. If you want to travel quick, go alone. If you want to travel far, go together. So you would have been engaged in collaborative relationships with various sections of the media, various channels, various clients, etc. over the period of time. So share a perspective on how you have collaborated with clients, for example, in developing relationships.
Yes, when it comes to journalism, of course, it's somewhat uniquely different. Our only clients are the readers. Everybody else is a means to that end. How do I serve my reader? Right? The problem is that most journalists never manage to actually meet a real reader of what they write or what they produce almost their entire lives. Apart from your immediate family and friends and all that. But, the readership is a very disengaged, amorphous mass. But actually it is this, virtual connect, which is which is the underpinning of the media business. And in fact, even today, if you look at the transformation which has been brought about by digital media, by social media, by citizen journalism, and so on, but the process hasn't changed. It is a process of collaborative sharing of information and insights and analysis. So how do I put together something? So I want to write something on the impact of GST on some industry. So I go talk to people who are players in the industry. I go talk to experts who understand the issues involved. So it's a collaborative effort. I may appear like the all-knowing oracle at the end of the day because I am the one who's actually writing it down. But this is actually the culmination of a team effort, if you would call it. And in fact, there is a second team effort happening within the organization because the raw material and the finished product are quite different. And in the transforming that raw report into a finished, readable, report with pictures and video and stuff like that is done by a big team of professionals. And in fact, most of them are people like your friend Yusuf. A good editor who takes badly written copy and rewrites it gets no credit. Their entire lives, they don't get their byline in the paper. But they do it every day. And they do it because, it's everybody for the team. They realize that they have this part to play, and it's an important part to play, and they play it. So I think this is really the key. So in some sense, although our industry is actually largely comprised of very individualistic, I would say even somewhat anarchistic individuals, at the end of the day, miraculously, everybody comes together and works as a team. And without this teamwork, which is sustained, the product will simply not happen.
Thank you. In fact, from my own experience in the corporate life, and I'm sure you would agree that today collaboration is the most preferred solution. It's just not collaboration in terms of working in the entire ecosystem, either the employees, the suppliers, your alliance partners, and various stakeholders. So collaborative relationships occur when two or more people work together in order to accomplish common goals. As I said, collaboration has become the norm in all organizations, working with different individuals who have different points of view. The moment you have a collaborative relationship coming up, then from my own experience, the focus shifts from being client to being client-centric rather than organizational-centric. And therefore, it allows your customers a chance to co-create within your organization. Great. I mean, the good thing here is that we are getting the whole idea of this panel was to bring in different perspectives. Mr. Srinivasan from the media, Mr. Lakshman from the corporate, and Ramakrishna from the theater. Let us look at some other facets of relationship as described in the book, Mr. Lakshman. When in conversation we become argumentative, wanting to prove the other person wrong or establish our superiority, we don't argue that is complimentary or collaborative. When you discuss, it is to know something, gain information, and we are openly attentive to all voices and willing to be non-judgmental, genuine dialogue takes place. This dialogue is different from debate or discussion. In dealing with the various stakeholders in your vast experience, what has been your message to your team to ensure productive interactions and innovative ideas to emerge in these meetings?
I think it is in the nature of man to be argumentative, and I think it arises from our ego state. I guess the animal kingdom does not have such problems. Yeah, I guess the animal kingdom does not have such problems. The French philosopher René Descartes, he didn't help any when he said, "I think, therefore I am." Thinking seems to be such a special attribute that it gives us and inherently justifies very egoistic, self-centered behavior. It seems that we almost think so that we can differ and argue. And I think the Eastern thought is very different. The Upanishadic thought is, I am, therefore I think. The human consciousness is the first principle. Intellect and the mind follow and they are mere outcomes. I think in the Eastern way of looking at things, thought almost becomes an object of knowledge. I mean, you can observe thought and learn and improve. I think we Indians, although Upanishadic by birth, we tend to be Cartesian by practice, so we argue quite a lot. Self-awareness, I think, would make us less argumentative and more productive. I have a very interesting story to share. This is quoted oftentimes in the automotive industry. As most of you know, Toyota Motor Company was always considered a great, successful company, and I personally agree with that. In the 90s, mid-90s, Ford Motor Company was struggling, so they wanted to go to Toyota Motor Company and learn what is going on. And they were, of course, invited by Mr. Cho, the president of Toyota Motor Company. And the president of Ford was a fellow called Red Poling. And he and his team landed at Toyota in Japan. And they were given this very, very special tour of the plant. When they came back to the office, Mr. Cho said, so what do you think, Mr. Poling? And Mr. Poling said, I did not see anything different. And then they continued to exchange pleasantries. The meeting ended. Mr. Poling and company left. And Mr. Cho invited his team and said, people, we have learned something very important today. Mr. Poling and his team did not see our competitiveness, which lies in our people. We are special because of our people. And Mr. Poling and company completely missed this point. The point is, had Mr. Cho did not want to debate, and Mr. Poling did not want a dialogue. Had he kind of opened his mind and listened and asked Mr. Cho a few questions, I guess he'd have learned a lot more than he did otherwise. The other point I wanted to make in this connection was that, you talked about predictive ideas and suggestions for
Through the
predictive
process
ideas.
of dialogue. Yeah.
Yeah, through the process of dialogue. I think there are certain established rules here. The leader must have great faith. The leaders must have great faith in their people's ability, capability to learn and improve. The second, you need to create a learning environment. What I mean by a learning environment, learning organization is one where improvements take place every day. It becomes a way of life. The third is negation of the fear of failure. The fourth, very important part, is training and development. So I go back to dialogue and debate. In debate to my mind is oppositional. There are two sides wanting to score points over each other. In dialogue, I think we are trying to create meaning. We are trying to understand each other for common good.
Thank you. Dialogical communication. Yeah. Just to summarize your thoughts on dialogue, dialogical communication builds from a position of positive intent and trust, as you said. To engage in this way requires party in conversation to allow for space to drop one's defenses and acknowledge each other. The essence of this has been beautifully captured in the book when T.D. Srinath has used a quote from Khalil Gibran from his book, The Prophet. The pillars of a temple stand together. I repeat, the pillars of a temple stand together yet apart, so must there be space in togetherness. It's such a beautiful quote. I'm sure you will be able to reflect on this and see there is so much sort of beautifully put in this quote. Srinath mentioned about giving and giving in. This has been brought out beautifully in the book as well. While giving has a positive connotation, giving in connotes resentment. Giving and giving in has been brought out beautifully in the book. While giving has a positive connotation, giving in connotes resentment and being forced to do something that one is unwilling to do. The transformation from giving in to giving involves the ability to change attitude, resulting in building relationships. Could you share your perspective on this, PC?
Yeah. Again, confining myself to theatre, theatre is all about giving. There are giving actors and non-giving actors, and I have worked with both. Giving actors are actors who understand the entire environment, understand the relationship between characters, understand the need to give of themselves to another actor for that actor to give of himself. If this does not happen, it becomes a kind of an extension of a monologue, and the play doesn't happen, in my opinion. Giving is very, very important. Giving of your character, giving of the situation, giving of the environment, giving of the stage to another actor. It makes for an ensemble performance. It's not giving in. Receiving, in terms of listening, is as important. And I go back to Gibran, who he has quoted extensively. Gibran has said, the need of giving honey by the flower is as much a need for it as the taking of honey for the bee. Neither is below each other. Inferior. So I think this, in a relationship, giving and receiving are two sides of the same coin. If it's just a one-sided coin, the relationship does not work. Giving in, of course, is negative. Receiving is positive. And you do not become inferior by receiving. In fact, the Bhagavad Gita says, Karmanyevadhikarascha ma phaleshu kadachana. Give. Without hope of any recompense, you will get something in return. But if you give only thinking that this is what I want back, I do not think it makes for a good relationship. Giving is very important. It's up. You are in a position to give. Give. You will get. And the relationship will be very good. That is my opinion. It works in theatre. It works again back to music. If the musician gives to the violinist what the violinist needs, and the violinist feeds back to and the mridangist does that, the concert becomes a concert, it becomes a conversation. Otherwise it becomes one man doing something and the other man just doing something by himself. I go there looking for musical conversation, and if this happens between the three artists, there is conversation that I carry back. Otherwise it's sort of one-sided.
Absolutely. So the ability to distinguish giving in and giving can make a significant difference to the type of person we become and the type of relationship that we form. Another facet of the relationship which T.T. Srinath mentioned, proving a point versus making a point. Come to think of it, all of us sort of encounter this in our daily lives. Proving a point versus making a point. He has brought this out beautifully, which has a bearing on relationships. Wanting to prove a point does not help in building relationships, as this is a punitive way of establishing one's superiority. Making a point is not done with intent to put down, but merely to clarify and support the intent. It embodies respect and mutuality. Can you share your thoughts, Mr. Srinivasan, on this facet of relationship?
I think, this is an ability which I have personally observed in all successful leaders. In my job, and particularly because, I write on business, I meet leaders, and I have been meeting leaders or business leaders, successful executives, for a long time. And there are people who are leaders by virtue of the position they hold. And there are leaders who are recognized and given the position that they actually hold because they've earned it. And that's what differentiates as somebody who has been made into a leader and somebody who evolves into a leader. And one of the key characteristics of successful leaders is this ability to to listen to multiple points of view, but also be very clear in their mind what their own point of view is. You see, that's important, because if you just listen to every point of view, then you are deciding by committee, which is typically what the government does, and we know how government decision making works. So what you need is actually, you need to be fairly clear about what is your point of view, but you need to have the ability to listen to other points of view and have the ability to modify your own, as and when you feel that it is, your point of view is not correct or not properly informed on facts. And successful leaders have this ability to do that, and do that in a very quick, this thing. And they are the ones who are least bothered by so-called loss of face. They're not bothered to, absorb information or even take advice from any source which is available to them, regardless of their position in the hierarchy. If you find typically that leaders who only talk to the next rung around them, and that, so the managing director only meets or talks to other directors or, heads of verticals or something like that, typically does not really have a good idea of what is happening either in his or her own company or in the environment around them. So I think, this sort of two-way relationship, the ability to sort of listen to other people, the ability to, actually give up the ego when you realize that, you're not right. That is the key to successful leadership. And I think that's very important. Because when you talk about this, what Srinath has written about, relationships and winning, basically, So winning and relationships at first glance do not really go together. A relationship sort of implies, two-way exchange, communication, emotion, none of which is really equated with winning, which usually has connotations of dominance or vanquishing the opponent, that viewing the other person as an opponent or the enemy, rather than a partner. So, but I think that is the difference. The real winners and the really successful leaders have this ability to actually drop the ego, drop the desire to prove a point, be right at the expense of being actually right.
Creating a win-win.
And create a win-win situation. Absolutely.
Actually, to quote Lao Tzu, a Chinese philosopher, wise men don't need to prove their point. Men who need to prove their point aren't wise.
Very apt put it.
Tact is the art of making a point without making an enemy is also a very famous saying. We just have a final round of questions. Another important facet which this book deals is with resistance. Resistance to change, which is talking about it in our everyday lives, in organizations, companies, families, etc. So resistance is not caused because of unwillingness, but due to lack of understanding. Resistance causes pain, and pain causes growth. We should look at it as a messenger that tells us that there is some aspect in us that requires attention, awareness, and action. In your experience, Mr. Lakshman, how is this played out in sort of helping employees embrace change by dealing with resistance, which has led to improved relationships?
I think it's absolutely true that resistance comes about because of lack of understanding or ignorance, whatever you call it. Let me share with you my own experience from Rane. I think it's about the mid-90s when the winds of change started blowing in industry, and particularly the automotive industry. And all the global majors were announcing plans to come to India, and the general feeling in the automotive industry, particularly people like us, who though historically had been admired companies, internally when we took stock, we sensed there were huge gaps between the expectations of these global majors and what was going on inside. I mean, we perceived some huge threats. We had indeed practiced fancy things like strategic planning and lean production, but all of that came to naught. So when the winds of change started blowing, we at Rane, we took stock of what is going on here and why are we where we are. So we looked at Japan. We looked at Japan because they had a tremendous track record in the automotive industry, and their offerings were very simple: good quality products at low cost. And when we drilled deeper into the Japanese experience, we saw it was a practice of what they call TQM, or total quality management. And total quality management at heart is simplicity itself. So simplicity certainly kind of breaks down resistance and enhances understanding. You know, I just want to take a minute here and digress. Many of you would have heard of the famous Supreme Court Justice from the United States, Justice Holmes, who said, "I wouldn't give a fig for simplicity this side of complexity, but my life for simplicity the other side of complexity." And TQM falls in this domain of simplicity, the other side of complexity. So what we went ahead and did was we got hold of a couple of Japanese professors from the best of universities in Tokyo and started going through the basic principles of TQM. The very first lesson we were taught was that management must be by facts and not by opinions. The second was people must listen and not just hear. The good old Simon Garfunkel song, people must listen and not just hear. The third was that we should walk the talk. And we started practicing these within our companies, within our plants, and soon we had created fertile grounds for embracing change. At that point, we were ready to take on town hall meetings and talk to our employees, all of them, from the shop floor right through to the managing directors of verticals or managers of verticals, and share the agony with them. I mean, we started talking about our pathetic profits, our very poor scrap rates, our resource wastages, our attitudes in general on a day-to-day basis. So we started discussing these with the people. The next we did was we started quantifying the problems. We started telling them that the global majors would expect a scrap rate of 50 parts per million, and we were at 100,000 parts per million. You know, to give you an example, the customers would want a delivery performance of 100, and our delivery was at maybe 60 with luck. So we started discussing these in town hall meetings. We started setting targets together with the employees. We created a joint vision of where we want to go. We involved the employees, total employee involvement, both of you referred to it. Total employee involvement is a great enabler in taking these initiatives forward. I think once we created this goal alignment within the organization, once the employees found that they could trust us, that we were speaking the truth, we soon saw that, they fell in line and they were just waiting for leadership to lead them. They wanted somebody to articulate goals, to create goals and take them forward. And we started gaining momentum and there was no looking back.
I can only corroborate this from my own experience when you mention about town hall. Again, in our IT company, several locations in India plus across the globe, any major policy announcement, including HR policies, once there used to be a mail and then followed by various town hall meetings addressing smaller groups and trying to understand the facts at the ground level and trying to explain. And over a period of time, this became a very useful means of communication and also getting over that resistance to change and accepting the new sort of policy, or as it were. In fact, I'm sure there are many executives here from various organizations. Maybe you would have tried this method of communicating through town hall meetings, but if some of you have not tried this, please trust me, try this method of town hall. It's very successful. Also, it results in improved relationships. Resistance has a negative connotation. The book, in my opinion, brings out a completely different perspective on resistance. It says, Gestalt, a German word for becoming whole, that resistance is not just a barrier to be removed, but it is a creative force to reckon with. Resistance is creative adjustment, difficult to change and marked with fear, but yet there is a keenness to do it. It says you resist because you are human. I think it's a beautiful perspective to resistance to change, which one can reflect on. What we see in others is really what we are ourselves. Because life is a reflection, from a relational perspective, reflection conveys the feeling that we are appreciating their feelings and finding their emotions important and in tune at a deeper human level. Could you reflect on this facet of the relationship, PC?
It's a very interesting question. In theater, we have an exercise called the mirror exercise. We put two people opposite each other and ask each in turn to replicate the actions of the other. And we tell the person who is doing the action not to cheat, not to score brownie points by doing things which are unexpected, but to do things, and we ask the person who's viewing him as a mirror image, him or her, to replicate it. It's a very difficult exercise. Many get exhausted doing this. That's because you are not used to looking at somebody else and replicating it. So this is an exercise that we do in terms of reflection. The mirror is a very interesting concept. A lot of us think a mirror is to look at yourselves. I tend to look at it differently. A mirror looks up to the world. Take the fairy tale Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. When the queen looks at the mirror and says, "Mirror, mirror, who is the fairest of us all?" she's not really thinking of herself, is she? The one who is in her mind is Snow White. So the mirror actually makes her think of somebody else. So every time you look at the mirror, you are looking at how you are going to be reflected in the eyes of other people, what relationships you're going to have with them. Very interestingly, we are still going through a play which has been running for a year called Chudamani, where a central motive is the mirror. And we have used the mirror in such a way that every character in the play looks at the mirror at some point and looks at the mirror and thinks of the other person, not of himself. Every person makes a comment of what the other person is when looking at himself or herself in the mirror. So it's really a juxtaposition of what it is, if I may use the word. You're not really looking at yourself. You're holding up a mirror to the world. It makes you reflect upon the world. It makes you reflect about other people. It makes for relationships that you are otherwise not thinking about.
Thank you. If you want amazing relationships, you have to examine and reflect on who you are as a person, as you rightly said. Another aspect of relationships is on the other side, which is relationships also get sour. Why do relationships sour? Mismatch in expectations demands change in behavior. Confession is a powerful tool for reconciliation. When you admit your mistakes, it diffuses in other person's anger. What are your views, Mr. Srinivasan, in restoring relationships as I think it's a very important part in winning back trust and relationships?
Absolutely. I think, you know, the ability to say, I'm wrong, is absolutely essential to actually building any kind of long-term relationship. Nobody's right all the time. In the news business, in the media business, we know this very well. We know every day that what we write is at best an approximation of the truth, a first draft. We strive to make everything as factual as possible, but we're the first to admit that we don't have all the facts on hand. And there may be other things which come to light subsequently, which would then show that the interpretation you placed on a particular event based on the facts that you had then available was wrong. And you know, how does say a newspaper then build credibility with its readers? You know, it eventually actually admitting that it's wrong is the first step to building credibility. Why is a Hindu, you know, why does the Hindu have such a reputation for credibility? The Hindu is the only newspaper which carries as a fixed portion of the editorial page every day corrections and clarifications. It's the only newspaper in the country which has an independent readers editor, an ombudsman, who reads and points out mistakes made by the writers and editors in the paper on behalf of the readers on an ongoing basis. And this is the reason why it is one of the most trusted newspapers in the country today. It's not because it claims that everything which appears in the Hindu is correct and it's the truth and nothing but the whole truth, but because it has the ability to continuously admit that, yes, we made a mistake, yes, this was not correct, or this interpretation was not correct. So this is absolutely essential to building trust. So when a relationship sours of any kind, I think, you know, you need to reflect on, you know, what are the reasons for that souring, and you must also have the ability to admit that it could be because of errors of omission as well as commission. And once you acknowledge a mistake, I think, you know, you can go beyond it.
Sure.
You know, so if you insist that you never make a mistake, then that's the beginning of the problem.
Actually, from my own professional and personal experience, I've also seen that you emphasize on reconciliation, not resolution. That helps. Reconciliation focuses on relationship, whereas the resolution focuses on the problem. Many a times when you focus on reconciliation, I've seen that the problem itself sort of loses its significance, as it were. So we can establish a relationship even if you are unable to solve the differences. Won't you agree?
Absolutely. I think, you know, agreeing to disagree, but also having the ability to sort of then set that disagreement aside and go forward with the relationship is, you know, essential to building a meaningful relationship.
Great. Our final question to each of the panelists. Here, if you can just answer in just one or maximum 2 sentences. We can start with you. What's your key takeaway from the book?
The importance of listening.
The importance of listening.
Listening. I don't think we listen enough.
Mr. P.C. Ramakrishnan, your key takeaway from the book?
Man is a social animal and must be involved in relationships, otherwise you can go to the Himalayas.
Mr. Lakshman?
Reading the book was like holding a mirror in front of me, not this exotic mirror that PC talked about, but the old-fashioned mirror.
Thank you. And my key takeaway from the book is there are no perfect relationships. It's how you accept the imperfections that make it perfect. Great. Now we will have 3 or 4 questions from the audience. So we'll throw it open for Q&A. I can see a lady raising her hand. Can you pass on a mic to her? You can use one of these mics, you can give it.
Hi, my question largely to
Little
Srinath.
louder.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My question is the bulwark of any relationship, of anybody's relationships, is my relationship with self. Mr. Lakshman talked about the Eastern philosophy where I am, therefore I think. But in today's context, the corporatized world, in a corporate context, we're all organization people. I am a president, I am an architect, I am a teacher, therefore I am. When you ask somebody, what do? Nobody says, I eat, pray, love. You say, I'm a teacher or a president or a vice president and so on. Now, with change, there are a lot of threat to the roles that we have in corporates. I lose my job to automation, I lose my job because of my performance or despite it, and I lose that role. So when I look into a mirror, I expect to see a president or an HR manager or a teacher or somebody, but I don't. When that relationship is threatened, I see something else. What is the advice we have to both individual, the kind of conversation I need to have with myself to strengthen that relationship with the image in the mirror where what I want to see is what I am?
Maybe I'll request PC to talk about the reflection part, and then possibly I'll have Lakshman also to answer that. Would you have anything to say on, she's talking about... Yeah.
In his book, I think he should answer that.
Oh, TT also, yeah.
Where's this PC? Okay. Yeah. Quickly. Thanks, Nanda. Nice question. A couple of things. One is, first of all, I recognize one thing, that we're all role players. We're all role players, which is what defines us. But the most important thing, I think, is beyond all that is a couple of things that I've learned in my life is can I be less harsh on myself? Can I be less judging of myself? Can I have compassion for myself? Because as the scriptures say, what you do unto yourself is what you do unto others. So if I can start respecting myself, appreciating myself, loving myself, acknowledging myself, I am human and therefore I am who I am. So I think the minute I begin, and I think Ram said it very truly and I've recognized it in theatre, because the more and more I feel congruent between who I am and what I can be, I think the less I will seek outside for validation. And I think that to me defines, because every time I have challenges. It's not that I'm any different. I struggle every day with fractured relationships, building. But every time I go back and I tell myself I'm human and therefore I'm imperfect, and it is because I'm imperfect that I am excellent. And the minute I can say that to myself, I think I start restoring. And I think that's what it is. So I think, because I do think that if I confine myself to roles which I play, I will in many ways fragment myself. Ram did a play called Adhe Adhure by Mohan Rakesh, in which he plays 5 characters. A woman sees 5 different people, and ultimately the man loses out because he doesn't know who he is. So the question is the role important, or is that? And as you know, as a process consultant, we have 3 ways of looking at it. The human being in a role, the human being as a process, and the human being as a being. So if I can recognize that I am being and therefore I am as divine as anybody else in this room, I think I will sustain. Thank you.
Any other question? Yes, please hand over the mic. Yeah.
I think this book is very timely in my opinion.
Little closer, little louder. Yeah.
Because I think as I use social media a lot, I see that the sensitivity among people is so low these days. And there's so much of negativity There's not much of reflection, listening, and comprehension about what others are saying. Last word seems to be the moral of the day. So, in this kind of an environment, when this message is very, very important to take it to the mass, how do we really do it, Srinath? I'm sure you need to sell millions of these books.
Yeah. No, I'll just share a story, Shekhar. You know, there were three people who came to the door. There was faith, there was trust, and there was love. And they knocked on the door. So the man of the home went and opened the door, and they said, we are three people, love, faith, and trust. We'd like to come in. So he said, please come in. He said, no, there's a proviso, there's a rider. You have to ask for the right person, and if you ask for the right person, three of us will come in. If you ask for the wrong person, all of us will go away. So he was very confused. So he went inside, and he asked his mother. He said, there is love, faith, and trust. Whom should I call? So the mother said, call Faith, because your wife has no faith in me. That's why we are having hassles at home. So the father decides to go out and says he'll call Faith. Then the wife says, no, hang on. Because your mother has no trust in me, therefore there is problems at home. So he decides maybe I should call trust. And the baby girl says, no, dad, call love, because faith and trust are inconsequential. So he goes out and says love, and all the three of them come in. So if you can love genuinely, faith and trust will follow.
Yes, there is. The mic here, the third row.
Mr. Srinath, this question is for you. When the panelists were discussing, how many times did you feel that you need to say something? And did you keep quiet because they were your friends or because of the purpose?
I do human process work. I facilitate conversations in organizations, and I've realized there's a very interesting. There's a guy called Harrison Owens who's done this thing called open space technology. He has 4 principles. He said, whatever is said is the best thing. Whenever it is said is the best time. Whenever it stops is the best time. Whoever says it is the right person.
I saw a lady there. Yeah, please.
Srinath, I have a question for you. Like it or not, it's very easy for us, and most of us in this room, I think, are in the late 40s, 50s, or over. It's very easy to dismiss social media and the ways of communication today. But like it or not, interpersonal relationships have changed, and interpersonal communication dynamics have changed. We communicate more through social media, long distance, and things like that. How relevant do you find what you've put in the book in the world today? I mean, do you think the same values and relationships will hold true as much in the relationships going forward? You know, when you're communicating more online, long distance, Skype, whatever it is.
Vinita, you will bear me out on this, Vinita. I think it's a great thing that's happening now, the social media, because every time I'm impacted, I make it a point to send the person a WhatsApp saying what it meant to me. I've written to you, and I've told you once, when Rishi acted, I wrote and said, you did a brilliant job. I think today, earlier you had to pick up a phone, you wouldn't get somebody, but today the WhatsApp, the social media. So the question is, are you willing? What is your intent? Is your intent to communicate? Because if your intent is to communicate, you will find ways to it. And today you have avenues in WhatsApp and email, which was not available to us 30 years ago. So I think there are huge possibilities now of acknowledging, celebrating, complimenting, being positive, rather than being all what you don't have to be, which is negative, vituperative. So if you choose to be negative, positive, celebrative, acknowledging, I think you can use the social media extremely well.
Thank you.
Right. Okay, right. Thank you very much, Mr. Lakshman, Mr. P.C. Ramakrishna, and Mr. Srinivasan, and to the lovely audience for the interactive sessions, leaving a lot of food for thought for all of us. Strive for continuous improvement instead of perfection, I would say. Trust, mutual respect, mindfulness, welcoming diversity, and open communication lead to winning relationships. I think it was Srinivasan, I think, who mentioned about communication. I would agree with that from my own professional experience. The biggest communication problem is we do not listen to understand. We listen to reply. Winning relationship means understanding each other, being supportive, inspiring one another, and mutually growing. When we win relationships, our lives become more meaningful and enjoyable. As I started with the story, I'll end with the story as well. This time from a Hindi movie classic, Kora Kagas, which I'm sure many of you would have seen this movie. The hero and the heroine are Jai Bahuduri and Vijay Anand. So Jai Bahuduri and Vijay Anand are attracted to each other and get married. Happy times leads to bitterness and acrimony, as he has a modest income and a low-key lifestyle, which gets further accentuated by her family. With constant bickering, she goes away to live with her parents. There is pressure on her to remarry, but she refuses. Towards the end, they meet accidentally in a railway station, in a waiting room. They look at each other as memories of joy, resentment, guilt, ego, empathy, gratitude, a variety of emotions. Jaya gathers herself and asks, "एक बात पूछूं?" "पूछो," says Vijay. Jaya then says, "क्या सब दोष मेरा ही था?" Vijay pauses and replies, "कुछ मेरा था, कुछ तुम्हारा था, और शायद कुछ हम दोनों का था." They look at each other and end up with a warm embrace, with tears rolling down as the train they were waiting to catch to go to their different destination leaves the station. Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes that's all it takes to win back relationships. I would like to end with my